All right, we're back, and in this segment, we're going to talk about how different ways to gain knowledge. All right. So, one way to gain knowledge is what you're experiencing right now, the method of authority. You're relying on an expert to tell you about something, and you're trusting that they really know what they're talking about. You're trusting that they're telling the truth. One of the things that we do in college to really assert the credibility is we have textbooks that talk about the concept, and we have the expert in the field who talks about the concept in lecture, and hopefully those two things overlap and you can have greater trust that if this expert who wrote the textbook and this expert who's teaching my class are presenting the same kind of information, it must be the consistent information, right? The problem with authorities is that they may not be telling the truth. They may not know what they're claiming to know. They may deliberately mislead you. They may accidentally mislead you. But if you're completely relying on authorities to know information, you can oftentimes end up with incorrect information. Let's use an example about you relying on an authority. The weather person. The weather person tells you there's a 70% chance that it's going to rain. And as a layperson, you think, well, that's a pretty good chance that at some point during the day it's going to rain. If it doesn't rain, is it because the authority was trying to mislead you? Probably not. More likely it's that they misread the signs, or that, weather is difficult to predict and other kinds of things, right? The authority can be wrong. And, sometimes people say, well, why don't you just stick your head out the window and see what the weather is yourself? Why are you asking an authority? Well, this is a technique called, there's lots of different names for that. It's called either a priori, or intuition, or the method of experience. In this style of acquiring knowledge, you rely on your own personal observations to make the decision. So if you stick your head out the window and you see that it's not currently raining, you might come to the conclusion it's not gonna rain, and you leave without your rain jacket or whatever you take, to protect yourself from rain. Later on in the day when it rains, you're like, man, I didn't see this coming. Whereas the authority might have been able to tell you it was going to rain because they can see on their satellites the clouds that are massing off the coast and are going to get here by the middle of the day, right? So sometimes our own personal experience is faulty. Now you might be wondering, why is there a picture of otters here? Well, I learned this the hard way when I was very young. I was about 12 years old when my family and I went on a vacation drive up the coast of California. And my mom and I were really excited to get to Monterey Bay because at the time when I was a kid, they had just really started to see the otter populations rebounding after the overfishing and stuff that had happened where they were capturing them for fur. And so we were very excited. We thought we were going to get to see some otters. So when we got to Monterey, my brother and my dad went off and did something else. I don't remember what they did. And they left my mom and I on the bluff overlooking Monterey Bay. We were gonna watch for otters. And whatever my brother and my dad were doing involved the binoculars. So they got to take the binoculars, and my mom and I were left with just our eyes to look down on the Monterey Bay, which was probably, I don't know, 300 feet, 500 feet away to the water surface. So we're sitting on the bluff looking at the water, and my mom goes, oh my gosh, I see an otter. So the two of us are like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing an otter. I see an otter. Okay, we're both seeing otters, and we're seeing otters diving, and we're seeing them frolicking, and we saw a mommy otter with a baby on her belly, and we were having so much fun watching these otters play. So my brother, now remember, they're tiny, right? They're like at least 500 feet away, and I might be underestimating the distance. So my brother and my dad come back. They have the binoculars. We're like, oh, we've had the greatest day watching these otters. Look down there. They're down there playing right now. Look, you can see them. So my brother looks through the binoculars and he goes, I don't see any otters. I'm like, there's one right there. It's floating on its back. It's got its baby on its tummy. And my brother's like, I do not see any. I don't see what you're talking about. And I thought, well, it's hard to explain where exactly to look. Here, give me the binoculars. I'll show you. So I look through the binoculars. I don't see it anymore either. And I'm like, I take the binoculars away. There's the otter, put the binoculars back. All I'm seeing is kelp. And I'm like, what is that? Kelp, by the way, is that plant life that these otters in the picture are all playing within. And that's something that otters do. They hang around the kelp bed and they, dive and feed and do all the stuff within the kelp. And so my mom and I thought, well, that makes sense that there's kelp there, right? Because otters like kelp. So I'm not seeing the otters when I look through the binoculars. I'm only seeing kelp. Finally, we figured out we were not watching the otters. We were watching the kelp heads, they're called. They are these balls of kelp. They're full of air. And it's what allows the leaves to float to the top of the surface is these balls full of air. And so we thought those were otters, and we sat there for like 3 hours watching these kelp heads. We never saw an otter the whole time, I don't think. I now know I cannot trust my experience. My experience is faulty. And so now I know that this is a faulty way to collect information. If you're going to rely exclusively on your own experience, you may see things that are not real. You may hear things that are not real. You may draw conclusions that are not true. And because it's based on your own eyes, ears, or logic, you think it's true, but in fact, it's leading you down the wrong pathway. All right, I'm going to pause you really quickly and come right back. Hopefully it won't make a weird noise. All right, so we now know for sure that even our eyes or ears can deceive us. And so some of the knowledge that we collect through the method of experience can lead us astray. Let's talk a little bit about another way of knowing information, and that is to just know what we've always known. This is the method of tenacity. So oftentimes things that we learned in childhood are the kinds of knowledges that we really stubbornly cling to, things that our moms told us or our teachers told us, and we don't even really sometimes know where we got this information, but we assume it must be true because we've always known it. We've known it since we were children. A great example for me is when I discovered that my husband believed that cracking your knuckles will give you arthritis. And I discovered he believed that when our children became adolescents and started cracking their knuckles. And he told them, oh, you don't do that. You're going to give yourself arthritis. I was like, wait, doctors have shown that doesn't give you arthritis. What are you talking about? Oh, my mom told me that. And you know what? I'm sorry. I don't mean to say this about my mother-in-law, but you're wrong. She was wrong. That's not true. It doesn't harm your knuckles. Yeah, when we were kids, that was the old wives' tale, but research has shown it doesn't harm your knuckles. It just releases benign gas, and that's what makes the noise. I even showed him a study that showed that people who cracked their knuckles in childhood were more likely to have arthritis than people who reported never cracking their knuckles in childhood. He goes, I don't believe it. I don't care what you show me. It doesn't matter. I don't believe it. I think it's harmful. That's what we call tenacity, where you're like, I don't care what you say, what evidence you have to the contrary. I believe what I believe, and I believe it because it's what I've always believed. That's tenacity. A lot of times we display tenacity about those kinds of things that we acquired through experience or from an authority. Like if we saw it with our own eyes, nothing somebody else tells us can disabuse us of the belief that what we saw with our own eyes is true. Or if a trusted authority told us, we will not dismiss it. And so tenacity is a really powerful approach to knowledge. In psychology, we try to follow the scientific method instead. So instead of just believing what we've always believed or trusting our own senses only or trusting an authority, we use objective tools to try and test the theories that we have, right? So we generate testable hypotheses and let the data, let the outcome guide us towards either supporting or refuting the existing theory. It's really important in the field of personality theory to realize that, like we saw in the quiz I gave you earlier, some theories are more testable than others, right? Some we can apply the empirical method to, and some we can't. And so we have to be aware that some of the things that are in, for example, Freudian theory are really like an authority is telling us the interpretation. We either support or refute that based on our own experiences. Right? So we either believe parts of Freudian theory because it supports what we have experienced in our lives, or we refute it because it goes contrary to what we've experienced in our own lives. It's not really a scientific test, right? Where we would say, okay, let's make a prediction, let's collect data, and let's see what happens. So in science, that's what we do. We don't just rely on authorities or our own experience or stubbornly cling. All right, so how do we measure personality? We will talk about this in the next segment.